welcome back to another Dr. Supercoach podcast powered by Code Sports. You're on this week with Pistol and another fabulous guest. We have Pig. How are you?
Hey, I'm back.
You're
How
back.
are you doing? How are you doing, Pistol? How was your weekend? How did your team score? Well, I know how your team scored. You're flying, but why don't you tell everyone else how your team scored?
It was decent. It was a 20-39 from 18 players. I am now up to 1261, so I'm really hoping that I can, I set the goal to break into the top 1K after the buys, like in round 3 when I was poorly ranked, and I'm like, that this is my new target, and I might achieve it. My team this week was looking solid-ish, lots of premiums, but only 18. And unfortunately, we saw Zach Butters just get handed a 1-week suspension. Hopefully, they fight that charge and he can get let off. Otherwise, I'm going to be relying on a rookie that I trade in this week to get me to 18. And I can't say I'm loving the options.
Yeah, not at all. I'm in the same boat where I've got 18 currently, and if Butters is out, I'll be on 17, and like you might have to find a rookie just for a green dot. But in my week that was just gone, 1946. I thought it was going a bit better than that, and then it didn't quite. Then it went downhill with like the Chad Warner, Tom Green, Zach Butters, poo-poos.
Yeah.
But then LDU and Houston kind of saved it a little bit at the end, so shout out to those guys. But
Absolutely.
Man, I'm just like, I think I was just saying before the podcast, I think I've been stuck between 9K and 11K for like 8 weeks. I just have not moved. It's just such a mid team, but not horrible. The good thing is now, like, my team's complete. I've finished in terms of I've got no rookies on field. I've got my 22 premiums. Like, obviously a few of them have to buy this week, so it won't fully show this week, but as of next week, I'll have all 22 field covered. But having said that, some of them are a bit skeptical. Like, I'll be relying on guys like Rosie and McKercher and Luke Jackson kind of as my lower, my lower premiums, whereas the teams that kind of got onto those really good cash cows and had good cash generation throughout the year, they might be able to push those like McKerchers and Rosies to kind of the D7 or the M9. That'd be a great scenario. I just missed too many good cash generators, so I'll cop those guys on field, but hopefully they're close enough to the big dogs.
Is it true that they've replaced the top 10K pass score every week just with a picture of your team?
Yeah, yes, it is. You get a green arrow pig or a red arrow pig.
Perfect. So quickly, no donation to the Cancer Council last week. So everyone must have survived what I thought was probably the hardest, probably the hardest buy rounds. So I'm surprised no donating for donuts in that one, just gone. And on the Patreon front, I just want to give, I guess, a bit more clarity surrounding the Dr. Supercoach Cup. For those that are unfamiliar, we run a 512 bracket of a knockout competition. Winner at the end wins a giant cup. I think it's a pretty huge trophy. We've done that for about 4 or so years, maybe 5 now, I can't remember. And to be eligible, you need to join up as a Dr. Supercoach patron at our base tier, and then follow the instructions to enter. The first instruction I will say on the podcast, because I feel like people just ignore the post and then they complain about it when they miss out on the instruction. The first one is to change your Slack team name to the appropriate in the appropriate manner, which is your Slack name, space, hyphen, space, and whatever your Supercoach team name is. You just put that in there, the exact same spelling as the Supercoach website. That would make our lives a million times easy. And then there's another step in joining the Dr. Supercoach Cup group on the actual Supercoach website with the code we will share again for those that may have missed it in our Patreon. So keep an eye out for those details. Every year there's a couple that just say, I've never heard about it, and then get upset. Hopefully we can avoid any dramas this year. Alrighty, Pick.
Perfect.
We've got
one of the many perks for the Dr. Supercoach Patreon.
It is.
Another one coming up next month. Free beers and pizza in Melbourne for our Patreons.
That's true. The Slack catch up. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah,
We've got.
me too.
I probably won't announce the location and the time on this, otherwise our bar tab might get a little bit too extreme. But yes, if you've missed the post, there is a Slack catch up in Melbourne. We're all hanging out on a weekend, and lunch and drinks and everything provided. So please check that out to the patrons if you've missed it. It'd be great to see you all there, all the co-hosts from all around Australia, since none of us are actually in Melbourne, are all flying down, and it would be great to meet everybody in person. So very, very much looking forward to that. All right, Pig.
Yes.
I have some questions for you, and these questions, I'm going through the podcast questions group on our Slack, and they are really good questions this week, and we're going to form the basis of our discussion for this podcast. And I went through them all, and it's everything we're going to talk about anyway, so we may as well keep it in this sort of structure. So I'm going to throw the big one at you first. Bell has asked for his final forward upgrade, Rankin versus Luke Jackson versus Curnow, and I'm going to throw in versus Mackay because I know some people are looking a little bit cheaper too.
This one's an interesting one. I think if you're okay this week, say you've got somehow 19 or 20 players this week, I think Rankin could be a great option. I do think out of those names you've mentioned, Rankin will average the most coming home. I've got him kind of a bit of a tier above those other three. He's kind of more in the Zach Fisher, maybe averaging around 100 kind of tier. So if you've got enough this week, like I prefer Rankin, and I prefer looking at my team and having Rankin in it as well. But considering he has a bye this week, those other guys probably could about equal him on total points. So if you kind of only had 17 this week and you needed a forward this week, and you wanted to save the money, I think Mackay and Curnow. I'm actually finding it hard to split Mackay and Curnow. I think they're pretty even. They probably both go like mid-90s for the rest of the year. Luke Jackson, I guess, is actually the one that's probably a bit interesting because he has the ability to score less than them, if that makes sense. He's had some bad games in there. But the coverage he provides for your ruck line, if you've got Livingston at R3 and you've got whoever it is in the ruck line, but especially some of the ruckmen have been injury prone in the past. So this is one that I'm actually really, really tossing up to because I can't afford Rankin, so I won't get him, but I'm tossing up Luke Jackson, Charlie Curnow, Harry Mackay, and I'm probably leaning Jackson just for the ruck cover because I am not going to have many trades left with my final team. But yeah, they all could be within a few points of each other. What do you think of these four?
Yeah, it is a great question. So thanks, Bell. I think I can afford all of them, and I am in the spot of purchasing my last F6. But I'm in the business of projecting what players are going to score for the rest of the season, not kind of how they've gone until this point. I think Curnow's run home is something we've flagged for weeks and weeks. And it's just a very soft, comfortable run home. Barely leaves Victoria. I think it's only twice. It's only twice. Pretty much all MCG or Marvel. The teams he plays are teams he can beat up on. I think at 448k, he's the guy that I would prefer because one, I think Rankin's a tiny bit overpriced as much as I love Rankin. 571k is not cheap, especially at this time of the year. So I don't think he's great value. And if you're getting an extra score from Curnow, it's just a lot of it's a lot more money, and I don't think you're necessarily going to get the reward out of it. In an ideal world, if you can afford it and it's the same amount of trades, go for it. I just feel like we've got one underpriced guy and one overpriced guy. Maybe Rankin averages a few more points, but I don't think it's going to be a huge difference. And I'd rather save a trade and save some cash and lean Charlie. Luke Jackson, that you mentioned before, I do like the ruck cover, but I also feel like there's a lot of people that either have Strawn R3 or they're just saving a trade for, if God forbid Gorn gets injured, then they can just sideways trade him to somebody else. And that might be a better play because it might also just not happen and the Rucks play 22 games and you don't have to stress about it, because I do think Jackson is probably the third best, option in terms of scoring potential, just because he's got that low floor. And Mackay is the kind of the X factor. So he averages 98 when Pittenay doesn't play, and he averages 83 with Pittenay. So if Pittenet's going to play, which we don't know yet, we really don't know how their team's going to set up, and we don't know for how long they're going to set up with this exact same structure with De Koning it as their main ruck. It's just impossible to tell, realistically, Pick. Like, he's probably going to average somewhere between, as they rest. I mean, De Koning can't play every game for the rest of the season with no rest. Like, at some stage, Pittenay's coming in. So, you might shark a 90 average, but I think that's probably going to be lower than all the other guys we've spoken about.
Yeah, I think I agree. So I think maybe then we rule out Rankin and we rule out Mackay. Just what we're saying, we probably think Curno's a better option than both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd still take Rankin over Jackson if you have the trades for the ruck cover disaster, if that comes through.
So how many trades do you think, like, let's say you're in my boat and I'm finishing my team right now, but 4 trades left. Would you want Jackson for that ruck cover with 4? Like, there's still going to be, I think there's still 10 weeks left. Or 9 after the bye.
When you say it like that, it sounds
disastrous. Is 4 trades enough, or is Jackson like if you're down to 4, get Jackson, or if you're still finishing your team with 6 or 7, then maybe not Jackson?
God, I feel like it's a fence-sitting answer to be like 4 is like the hardest one to choose, because it also matters on like the cover in your other positions, right? Like if I'm eyeing off getting Rosie at M9, if I cop a Butters 1 week suspension, doesn't really matter if I've got Butters as cover. Sorry, as Rosie as cover. But if you don't have anyone as cover or bad cover, you need to use a trade there when other people might not need to use that trade. So I think if you have decent-ish cover in other lines, 4 trades is probably fine to get through the season when you're just relying on a ruck injury. But if you don't have cover or don't have good cover, and if you don't have any good cover, then I think you probably can get Luke Jackson and have 4 trades left. But if you have 5, don't get him.
Yeah, 4.5 is the line.
It's my line.
I've gone down to 4, but I think a lot of people will be in this similar boat where I've intentionally got DPP everywhere, like the Dawson and Fisher swings. I've got mid and forward swings everywhere through my backline and midfield. So I guess if people have done that as well, it might be okay to go to 4. And, if you get a injury in your back line, then maybe you could swing Fisher back there for a week kind of thing. The DPP this year, I think, has opened a few things up as well.
Yep. No, I think that's true. So we've got a big one. What do we do with people like Green and Steele and Brayshaw and even potentially, I guess, we'll say Rosie, but I don't know if he's necessarily in that same category.
Yeah, I think I'm holding them now, but yeah, I hate saying team dependent, but this one does depend on how many trades you got left. If you are someone, all right, let's make a call. If at the end of next week we're coming out of the buys and we're going to round 16, we're back to best 22, everyone's got a full team, you've finished all your upgrades, how many for those 9 weeks do you want for injuries, and how many, like we've just said, 4 is getting light, so maybe you want 4 or 5 for injuries, and then if you've got more than that, you can do the sideways?
Yeah, I think that your 4.5 line is probably bang on. I like that. I think it's so hard with Green as well because he's got such a high ceiling, which makes him a really good player to loophole. So, like, in an ideal situation, if you can loophole him and Rosie, you've got 2 guys with high ceilings and you just hope you don't get stuck with a 70 on field, and you hope you get the 150 that's bound to come. It does make it makes it quite difficult. I don't love trading out high ceiling players, especially if you're in a position to loop. I think this is another question coming, but it's very relevant to this, is that if you had, 100K and a trade and you're going to spend it, and you can either upgrade a rookie to Rosie at M9 or just upgrade Tom Green straight to somebody like Zach Merritt or Adam Treloar or someone like that. I know, has your opinion changed early in the year where you're like, just get best 22 no matter what? Or, I mean, it's allowed to change given no one kind of expected someone of Rosie's class to get so cheap. But what would you do in that scenario?
I think I still stick by, if you've got 100K to spare, then I would be going up to get just the best 22 on field if you can. The best 22 is hard to predict at the moment because I feel like every man and his dog's getting tagged right now, which is something we can talk about in a bit. But I still think I want my money on field where possible. Like if you've got Rosie on the bench but he's only covering like 4 of the next 10 rounds, it's kind of feels like a bit of a waste to me. But I can understand. I guess Rosie doesn't have the giant ceiling, but like the Tom Green ceiling on the bench does have some appeal. But if I had 100K floating around and if I had the trades to do it, I'd just get, like the Tom Green. I still am not even sure I would trade Tom Green out.
You'd love Tom Green, though.
It's irrational. He's done nothing to deserve my love, but I just can't go past him.
Like, had a good round 0, 1, and 2, and you're just like, this guy all season, he's the best.
If you took those 3 scores away, he would be averaging so poorly.
Terrible. Like, he's still averaging sub 100 even now.
Yeah. So, I'm a fan of all your money on field doing work for you, but I know you don't mind a bit of a loop action. Would you get the rookie up to Rosie for the cover and the maybe scores?
I would, but it's not for the exact same reason as earlier in the year. I think, all things considered, I think I can, in this situation, I can see the merit.
The Zach Merritt?
The Zach Merritt. I can see the merit in the Green up move. However, as I alluded to earlier, like Rosie is such an unbelievably good player to be able to get for 400K. Like that feels like that never happens. Like it's usually someone much worse than him that gets the 400, and you're like, yeah, I'll take a 95 average and loop in an 105. Like Rosie's a jet. Like he's so good. You started with him. You paid 600 plus K. Like
I thought he could be a top 10.
He's genuinely an amazing player. So to be able to get him as your M9 feels like a gift from God. And then on top of that, just the uncertainty of the midfielders that we're seeing with all the tags. I think it was Jaden posted on Twitter about AFL Fantasy, which is different than AFL SuperCoach, but still interesting, that the worst AFL Fantasy rounds in history for mids. Jaden said that the last round was the worst in history, and round 13 was the 5th worst in history for AFL Fantasy mids.
Yeah,
so
they're just getting slammed right now.
If they're that unpredictable and that volatile, why am I paying up for anybody? Like, Sarong 96 and people just paid 600K. Butters just got 76. Dawson, thank you, Dawson 79. Was it Dunkley 90 still? 83. Like these are terrible scores, which means I don't really feel like upgrading Green to somebody is going to be of that much benefit when I may as well, I guess, take another gamble on a high ceiling sort of guy.
Yeah. No, I can definitely understand that. Although maybe it's trading Green, sliding Dacos into the mids and then getting one of these really good defenders that are scoring well. Like I've got more faith in the Dan Houstons and the Luke Ryans and the Nick Dacoses than nearly all of these mids right now. I
think it's a really fair point. I know we touched on it last week ironically, because Jordan Clark, who then also put out a stinker. But
he'll be back.
People like even Bailey Dale are going like 110 since he's come back into the side. Like he's putting out huge scores. Like these are scores that you want your premium midfielders to score. Like all these people in these halfback roles are averaging monster numbers. Like if you didn't have the Houston and you didn't have Sheasel, you didn't have all these guys, like they might be just better options than all these mids that we're talking about. And I still believe that to be true this week. Like defenders is where all the cheap points is at the moment. So I'd be trying to load up on defenders, not loading up on midfielders.
Yeah. And I guess that could segue to, and some people are asking that don't have the cash to get Rosie M9. Is he a fine M8? Would you be happy with him? Or a little bit of that segue, would you actually rather a defender around his price, like, I don't know, a Salem type or...
Oof. It's a hard question. Look, I think Rosie at that price is still a gift that I would just take and hope for the best because the upside is so high. To get someone equivalent upside, what you're probably looking at like the Yo range, like 518-ish or 514K, maybe Whitfield's like 500K.
They're nearly 100K more than Rosie.
That's 100K more. Like
Yeah.
I just feel like for 100K for someone that might be better and might not be better, I just would rather Rosie and save you might even save a trade because you don't need to raise as many funds. You might be able to hold on to a better rookie for cover. The cash can do a lot for your teams. I feel pretty strongly that when something is almost too good to be true, it's probably best just not to overthink it.
Yeah, that is true. I guess the exception to that is someone finishing their team right now. There are a few people say finishing their team with 500K for their last slot. So Rosie is obviously in that price range. But I'm looking at who else you could get for that price, and there isn't much.
There's no one.
Like it is like the Whitfields, the D'Ambrosios, the Newcombs, the Blakeys. Like Rosie's probably better than all of them, do you think?
Yeah, I do. Well, at least on par.
Yeah.
And cheaper.
But I guess the cheapness doesn't matter when it's your final upgrade spot. If you got 100K sitting there but you're not going to use it, that could seem like a bit of a waste.
Yeah. Well, look, there is a question, and it's come up a couple of times in this podcast questions chat too. It's that like if you're in this situation and you can either spend an additional trade to free up, let's say 200K, are you better off, maybe 200, that's exorbitant, but are you better off spending a further trade and getting Zeret, or, in the forward line equivalent, spending an extra trade and getting Rankin, or in the back line, maybe it's like spending an extra trade and, I don't know, getting a Sheasel, then getting like a Whitfield. Like, are these extra trades worth it to get the better player at this stage of the year?
I'm going to say it's the 4.5 trades line. If you're going to be finishing your team with 4 trades, then no, you can't do that. But if you're going to be finishing with 6 or maybe even 5, then yeah, maybe you could spend that extra amount. That like maybe because I'm in that boat, I could get rid of Jai Clark, cash him out, and instead of getting Rosie, it would allow me to get Merritt. But then I'd be finishing with 3 trades, and I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the line. If you're doing this extra trade, but it still leaves you with 5 at the end, I'd be okay with that. But not if it leaves you with 4 or 3 like me.
I think I see 3 for a lot of teams, and I just think 3 sounds really bad to me. Like 4, you're a gambler and you want to take a punt, and I can be like, look, that's fine. You like understand the risk and you could maybe go for it. But 3, that sounds terrifying. And I mean, there's also a difference if that's your M9 or if that's your M8, for example, right? Like, I think going down to 3 with M9 feels okay-ish, probably fine. But going down to 3 as your, no major cover just screams bad idea. So I know there's a lot of teams that have asked. There's a lot of coaches that asked me that question already this week, and going down to 3 to get a better player, I'd rather 4 and Kerno than 3 and Rankin for absolute sure.
Yep. Yeah, and I've made that call that I'm having Rosie in 4 instead of Merritt and 3.
Righty, the next one is rookie related. So let's say, hypothetically, you are looking at 18 players this week. Yep. Is it better to downgrade some of your rookies that need to be downgraded to the round 15 rookies who aren't playing, like the Krugers, the Strauns, Dowlings, Showmakers, because they all look like solid options? Or is it best to get somebody that's just playing this week to add in an extra number just in case you cop some sort of injury?
I don't even know who's going to be playing this week. That's a green dot that could come in. I think the players on the round 15 are good. Like, and you can put Schoenmaker in that group as well, hoping he keeps his spot. I think those guys, Dowling, Kruger, Schoenmaker, I'm not sure about Strawn. I think he could get dropped. But they could provide you coverage for like the next month potentially. And some coverage on the bench is still important. Like if we get a Tom Green like 1 weeker and you don't really have the trades to get rid of him, you know, putting a Dowling or a Jai Clark in his place is still quite valuable. So you're not copping a donut. So I think these round 15 ones are worth it still. Probably not Strawn, and I'm not certain he holds. Schoenmaker, he isn't on the bubble yet, so you could wait a week for him. But Dowling and Kruger, I'd be pretty okay with getting if you've got enough players this week, because I just don't know who else you're getting really.
I think there's some talk that given Petrarca's injury, we might see someone like Colton Tholstrup, who's 153k, maybe Bailey Laurie, who's 111,000, both forward-only options. They might come in, to this Melbourne side. And realistically, I don't think I like either of them as much as I like the round 15 guys. So, honestly, if you bring in one of these guys that's going to get named this week, you still might be looking at a 20 score. And then it wasn't really worth it when someone like Schoenmakers or Dowling look like they could be, 50, 60, 70 even, scorers. So I would lean the better rookie. But it's a great question, especially if you're down to 17. Because when you're 17, you're like, do I want better cover throughout the rest of the season? Let's say Schoenmakers looks like he's going to be solid cover for the whole year, because his debut was awesome, so I'd be surprised if he was dropped anytime soon.
He was great.
Or do I not get him just to get like a 1 week, Warner might last 1 more week before they bring in Brendan Cox into Fremantle's side. So then you're stuck with a Warner that gets 50, 60 points this week, but then you have no cover for the rest of the year in that back line.
Yeah, I've seen a few Freo fans that were saying that like Warner was a last minute in because Chapman was a last minute out, and they were saying as soon as Chapman back, Warner's out. So I don't rate his job security. We just need a lifeline of a Sean Manor or a Cooper Simpson recall. Like one of these guys that's kind of played 2 games on the bubble. I thought actually both looked pretty good in their time. Just come on.
Yeah, Manor especially, I'm surprised hasn't been getting more games. I hope he comes in.
Yeah, so a Manor or a Simpson, that's what I'm gonna do a rain dance for one of those 2 guys.
So now, look, there's not too many rookies to talk about, and we have to really wait and see on the team news. Apologies, it's not like a really obvious choice to talk about this week. No. Which midfielders, I know you've mentioned Zeret a bit earlier, which ones should we be targeting coming off the bye this week? Like, what's your order of midfield tradings? Because they've been a bit of a disaster class lately.
Well, we kind of briefly touched on, I feel like the tags are absolutely back right now. I feel like every team is pulling out a tag any given week. Like, who would have thought kind of Toby Bedford or someone like that would tag? So I feel like the midfielders are pretty unpredictable, and I think you still go for the ones who you think will be the best, but just accept that anyone could be tagged. And I mean, that's why we said maybe some of the defenders are better because they're not getting tagged. But I would still have, Bont is obviously on the buy, so we're not going to buy him, but just put him in the basket of someone you definitely need. I've probably still got the next trio of, not in any particular order, but Sarong, Butters and Merritt, I still think should be really safe and for being top 8. They've all had their buy now, so I'd be looking to buy any of them.
Even with Merritt's run of potentially multiple tags coming up?
Yeah, I feel like it's just hard to predict the tag at the moment. Like
So
there are some teams that are doing it every week, like kind of Sydney have. But there's some teams that maybe just do it for a specific opponent and don't do it all the time. Merritt does have a lot of teams coming up that could tag him. So that's kind of me justifying why I'm getting Rosie and not him, making myself feel a bit better that maybe he's got some tags coming. But look, I still think he's that good. And he's had games where he's been tagged this year. Like he got a heavy tag by Chincotta the other week against Carlton. I think he still got a 125. And then 2 of his other games he got tagged in, he still got high 90s. So he's still getting it done. Like there's guys like Butters and Green that are getting tagged and getting 60s and 70s. Merritt at least is still getting 90s when he's getting tagged. So I think he's great. So Bont, Sarong, Butters and Merritt, like there are 4 I think you really want. Honestly, then it could be anyone.
So I did something a bit strange 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago now. And I didn't really discuss. I think that was the week I wasn't on the podcast. And I actually got Walsh over Zeret.
Yep.
And that was keeping an eye on the rest of the season and the tags. And I was a bit worried about how Zeret would go. Look, early days last week didn't go amazing. Getting an 87 from Walsh and Zeret did quite well. I think the week before was a bit reversed though, so I'm about even. But I think Walsh on the way home has a really strong fixture run, or at least not as negative of a fixture run as some other clubs.
No, it's really good. Carlton, I think it's in like the top 4 or 5 for easiest midfielder runs, the Carlton coming home.
They don't have too many teams that tag, and I also would consider that Walsh isn't necessarily going to get the tag every time. I mean, probably because Cripps is such a beast. But in a fully fit team as well, I don't know if Chera might cop some attention, or it's a little bit hard to predict. Probably does get 1 or 2 on the run home, but the rest of the games, as we talked about, Carlton barely leaving Victoria, just seems like a good run. I feel like if I was looking for someone else, because I already had Zeret, I feel like I would lean towards Walsh, and it's a pretty kind price at $548K. But you still got your Gouldens at $590. It's pretty expensive. LDU $610. Like all these guys are in really hot form, and look, they're passing the eye test, and they look really good. So I feel like they're pretty safe. There's just not many others that are passing the eye test at the moment, to be honest.
No, and there always is, like I think Selby talks about this a lot, is that there's usually a bunch of players that have a like 15+ point difference between, their pre and post buy averages. There's always some that start really hot and then kind of drop off. And then there's always some, like Noah Anderson's done it at years, LDU did it last year. There's guys that kind of have a bit of average up to their buy and then just go bonkers after their buy, and it's just trying to identify who those are. And I'm not really sure how we do it. Like the eye test is probably the way, and maybe trying to pick guys that don't get tagged. So yeah,
even Cripps.
If Gordon's passing the eye test that well, it could be him. If LDU's passing the eye test, I think you just got to back your gut a bit, because we don't really have data to say why someone's just going to explode in the second half. I do agree with you that I think Walsh is a great purchase. I was actually looking to get him, but he's just a bit out of my price. If I do, I could do Mackay and Walsh, but I think I want Curnow, and that means probably Rosie. I'm not sure. I have to think about that a bit more. But yeah, Walsh, a really favourable run home, doesn't get tagged very much. He's going to, little sneak peek, he's making my captain video this week. So he's got Geelong, so he's got a nice matchup, which should give you a little sugar hit. He's playing against the easiest midfield in the comp this week. The only thing, I was looking at his stats. Walsh is getting so many disposals, but he's just going at poor efficiency. But then he's saving himself with heaps of tackles. But then he's averaging only 2 marks a game, whereas the best midfielders average 6 marks a game. So I just don't know why he's not getting around the ground. He seems like someone that's fit enough and should be able to get around and get more marks. So if he can get that back into his game, well, he's going to go massive. But it's interesting. There's a couple of stats he's excelling at, over-excelling, and then there's some other stats that are just bringing him back down to earth.
It's pretty weird. It's like he's not he could be like the ultimate fantasy footballer. I mean, he already has a really high average, but as you just outlined, there's some deficiencies in his game that he could take it to even another level, but it's already scoring well. So feels like a relatively higher upside sort of pick if he can put everything together, have a high efficiency sort of game, but is also marking.
I mean, the game 2 weeks ago against Port, he had 34 disposals and 13 tackles. That looks like it should be massive, but he went at poor efficiency and he had 1 mark.
Yeah, he couldn't hit a target in the first half. It was terrible. So it was so hard to watch.
he's just like nearly. If he puts it together, like it's going to be awesome. And I think he's a great purchase with that easy run home. I do agree.
Awesome. So just a couple more questions. Not too many. So at this stage of the season, are we better off bringing in low-priced options who have great job security like Cabman or Bruce, or over someone on the bubble or expected to go up in price, like let's say Jack Hutchinson, given how unlikely it is that we trade them out again? So I'll throw in as well, is it worthwhile getting in someone like Cabman at 180k, or should we just get the 102k DPP non-playing players?
No, I don't think you should be paying 183k for a rookie right now, especially if they're scoring 23 like Cadman did last week.
No, I don't think I agree with you. If you cheap out now, you try and make sure that you have some sort of playing cover. You definitely don't need more than 1 or 2 in terms of on a line. You kind of more depending on the midfield. Yeah, you don't need more than 1 per line. But I wouldn't be paying up to guarantee myself some cover unless they were exceptionally good. So show and makers looks like that might be worth it. But again, if you need that DPP and you have someone else, your other D10 doesn't have, or D8 I should say, doesn't have any DPP, and then you trade in show makers, and you wouldn't be able to swing anyone back potentially.
Yeah. Well, that's actually why I'm passing on him, because I've got Zach Reed clogging up a gross D8 spot, so I need my other bench one as a DPP swing. So that's a good point. Keep an eye out for that, because I know there will be people really keen on show and makers, and fair enough.
Yeah.
But if you do have a dead D8 that has no DPP, it could hurt you a little bit.
I have the exact same situation, but with Marty Hoare. So I'm forced into getting a DPP because I've got that. I guess Nick Martin can kind of swing between both and Dacos or whatever, and it's just unfortunate because I think Shellmax will be a really good pick, but I need the DPP. So it is what it is. But it is good to identify it, as well as one that I noticed has caught some people out is when you make your trades this week, just have a bit of a play on like putting your best 22 on field and make sure that you can actually get all 22 on, because I've seen some people accidentally bring in a forward and get stuck with having 3 forward rookies in their forward line and not being able to complete their team because of it, just where all the big DPPs have ended up.
That's a really great tip. Spend the time now to put all 22 on field and make sure you've got it right. And it's a trap, because you can go, oh, okay, sweet. Like you just mentioned Jack Hutchinson. He's a great trade in 102k, and he should be playing, so he's awesome. But if you've already got 2 forward rookies, then if you're getting him, then you're setting yourself up to fail. So do check that. But in answer to that other question, yes, now's the time to go cheap. If you can go cheap and they're a green dot, even better.
Alrighty, last question here from Kevin. He says, I'm going to summarize it, but he has Fraser as his F 6. And he wanted to know, is it a good idea to field Fraser every week while he keeps going up in price and then try and upgrade him to a primo with the cash that he has in the bank? Or, and that might take multiple weeks, or is it best to just wait for someone like Dowling, who he also has, to go up in price and then downgrade Dowling and then upgrade Fraser? So he'd have to spend an additional trade to do the one up, one down, rather than just waiting for Fraser to get close enough to be able to trade him to a premium.
I think this one to me, as you're reading that, really made me think, like, what's he playing for? Because if you're playing for rank, I feel like you want all your rookies off the field. You want 22 premiums on the field as of next week.
Yep.
If you're still fielding Fraser and someone else is fielding, even if it's Curnow, that's probably 30 or 40 points every week they're putting on you. So if you're playing for rank, get your rookies off the field now and have 22 premiums. But as you're reading that, I was like, if this guy's playing for league and he can just wait a few more weeks and get those guys really fat and then get a much better option, then I love that. So
as long as you make finals.
Yeah, as long as you make finals. So I guess that's a little bit of a what are you playing for? But yeah, if it's for rank, if you're playing for overall, I think people want to be full premium 22 as of next week.
Yeah.
Or 23 if you're pistol.
I think that's the exact same advice I would give. You just want to get those rookies off as soon as possible, because we're essentially doing all this upgrading, trying to avoid a 20 score from a rookie. And the longer you have one on, you're asking for it almost. So try and upgrade and get them off as soon as you can. It'll just lead me to talk about like people like Amadi coming off a 180. To make 100K, he needs to go back-to-back 80s, which is unlikely given he was averaging like 40 before this game.
Well, I think this was the first time he even scored 80 this year.
It's just, it's just, don't bother these sort of tricky picks.
Not at this time of the year. Like when we're talking about it round 1 or 2, getting a Hogan or a Mackay for like 100K crash grab, I could understand why people did it, but not
round 8, McKercher, that was good.
It should have been.
It should have been.
I've still got him. I'm still relying on him.
Unbelievable. Oh, gosh. I think at that price, there's no real cheap forwards that I like too much. Taylor Adams is cheap, but there will be job security issues when Mills and Parker are fit.
Injury concern as well.
What about a real punt? Keziah Pickett, 360K.
I did not mind this at all. Like
he got 83% CBAs.
Exactly. I looked into this when I was like trying to work out. Last week I sat down with a pen and paper and tried to work out my final trades. And I was thinking, like, do I go... Because I probably could get merit if I went Keziah Pickett in the forward line. And it did tempt me because, like you said, 80-something% CBAs when Petrarca went out injured. Cozzy was the one that went in the midfield. I think he was like their highest midfielder after Truck went out. Tempting. Like I'm still not ruling it out. I kind of feel like I'd like to see it 1 or 2 more times, but we don't have that luxury of time. You need your upgrades now.
It's not it's a very high risk pick because even with 52% CBAs, you put out like a 30. So it's not like fully. I was against a tough Fremantle midfield, but it's not a guarantee to go well just because he's getting the role, and he does play a lot of tough midfields. Like Melbourne's run home is really hard. They've got North this week, but Brisbane, West Coast, which is a little bit easier. Essendon, Fremantle, GWS, Bulldogs, Port, Gold Coast, Collingwood. Like that's rough.
Yeah, that looks tough. Yeah.
There's a world in which they only win 2 or 3 games for the rest of the season.
I'm looking at Cozzy's stat line. It's either in the 40s. He's had 3 times he's scored in the 40s, and that would kill you.
Yeah.
Everything else, every other score he's had has been over 70. So that's kind of looking all right. Plus a 94, last week when he went in there for Truck. I don't hate it. But
I'd much prefer Mackay for an extra like 60, 70K.
Yeah, or Curnow for another 100.
Absolutely. I spent too long talking about Pickett. Apologies. Pig, was there anything else that you wanted to discuss?
No, I think it's, like we said, it's just trying to get through this week, make sure you've got 18, and then come out of next week with no rookies on the field, I think is how we should be looking. And you and I have kind of explored it this week, is that I think you want, let's call it 4 or 5 injury trades for the remaining 10 weeks. So if you're coming out of it with 8, then I'm going to give you permission to do 3 luxury sideways trades.
Alrighty. No, I seconds almost all your thoughts this podcast, Pig, which is actually, I'd say, relatively rare, given I've been on the wild side for a lot of this season. But it's going to be an interesting week. I hope this Butters news is just the only carnage we receive, because if people are already struggling to get to 18, Butters is out, and then, it just takes 1 or 2 more things and it all comes crumbling, crashing down. So very interested to see how the rest of this week unfolds. But until then, Pig, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. And thanks to everyone tuning in. You can find myself at pistol_DRSC. If you have any additional questions, you find Pig at Pig_DRSC. Find JB at JB_DRSC and Chizo at Chizo_DRSC. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.